The TARDIS landed not with a wheezing, groaning sound, but with an explosion, forcing its way through almost solid air, skidding for a metre on pavement, and then stopping, smoking, as if it were an engine burning oil. Slowly the doors opened, the Doctor on one side and Romana on the other. Both looked as if they needed a change of clothes, a massage and a nap. They gazed around them, half dazed. The few people on the pavement nearby had not appeared to notice them.
"What was that?"
Romana finally gasped. The Doctor just shook his head with a look of resignation, then looked over his shoulder.
"K9?"
he asked. K9 sat a metre or so behind them. One of his ears had become detached, and his metal shell had become scuffed and dented. His remaining working ear whirred back and forth for a moment.
"No vocabulary available,"
he finally replied.
"I'd call it something worse than that, but there may be children present. Stay here while we look around. Find out what the TARDIS knows about that landing." "Master?"
The Doctor and Romana exited the TARDIS and shut the doors.
"I never want to go through that again."
"I concur, but let's find out what it was first."
They were in a city, apparently on Earth. They saw shops on both sides of the road, a few cars on that same street, and no clouds in the sky.
"When and where are we? Besides Earth, I mean."
"It appears to be the first quarter of the 21st century,"
the Doctor said, watching a teenager go by completely engrossed in her smartphone. They began walking down the road, their aching muscles slowly recovering. The Doctor walked with a slight limp.
"Are you all right?"
"Oh yes, I'll be fine in a moment."
"Are you sure it's the first quarter of the 21st century?"
Romana then inquired, nodding towards two men sitting at a bus stop, each reading a newspaper.
"Wherever it is, it's the UK. Hear that radio?"
He pointed to an open window above a bookstore.
"That's Kitchen Disco on Radio 2.
"But that bed and breakfast looks Irish, doesn't it?"
Romana said, pointing to a small house across the street.
"Quarry Ridge B&B."
"It does. And that bank, the First Federal Bank, that would be American."
The Doctor glanced up towards a hill in the distance.
"Look at that observatory on top of the hill. The spitting image of the Australian Astronomical Observatory outside Sydney."
"Is this Sydney?"
"No sea air."
"Australia, Ireland, America, and the UK. All in one place."
"Maybe it's a theme park."
"Doctor?"
"Or possibly a Telrikian zoo. Did you know they used to kidnap people and put them on display?"
"Doctor!"
Romana insisted more urgently.
"They once captured an entire tribe of Plains Indians. I had to negotiate for a week to get them out. Is it just me, or is it getting cold?"
"Doctor, what's happening to the sun?"
Romana was looking at the burning orb, which appeared to be fading out.
"That's not an eclipse! Run! Back to the TARDIS!"
They turned and ran. Romana called,
"K9, open the doors."
Then the sun began to implode. Tremors shook the ground and buildings began to fall apart. The Doctor and Romana clung to a street lamp that swayed dangerously. Cars crashed around them, and those pedestrians who could run ran in blind panic. The Doctor somehow stood, grabbed Romana, and pushed her towards the TARDIS.
"Run!"
he rasped, even as the entire street sank into the earth. The Doctor and Romana did not feel anything as they were instantly crushed to death. 7, 2, 10, 0, 4, 4, 11, 0, 5, 6. Numbers were running through the Doctor's head. He could not understand why. He could not remember anything, not even his own name.
"Doctor!"
he heard Romana cry.
"Yes, that's it,"
he announced, sitting bolt upright. The Doctor was on a bed in a small but nicely decorated bedroom with a settee near the window.
"At least it's not a shower this time,"
he muttered to himself. Romana had just opened the door and was staring at him wide-eyed.
"What happened?"
"I dreamt about numbers. It's fading now."
"I had the same dream."
"Did they make sense to you?"
Romana shook her head, entered the room, and flopped down onto the settee.
"But before that, we landed on a planet."
"Earth, we thought."
Something was wrong.
The sun imploded.
We died!
Look at your clothes.
All of Romana's clothes were not only clean, but also brand new. The doctor looked down at his own outfit. It was equally pristine. Before they could react, they heard footsteps just outside the doorway. They braced themselves for whatever might appear. When the door opened, a middle-aged Irishwoman entered with cups of tea and scones on a tray.
"Hello, dears. Who's ready for tea?"
She said in a sing-song voice which might have come straight out of a film by John Ford.
Who are you?
Oh, you were tired, weren't you? Mrs. Saunders, I do hope you're enjoying a stay. Now how about that tea?
Mrs. Saunders, the world has just ended, torn itself to pieces in a gravitational whirlpool after the star that gave it life imploded, tearing away the heart of this entire solar system. Tea would be most welcome.
He scooped a cup off the tray and drank it down almost instantly.
Excellent,
he proclaimed, replacing the cup. Mrs. Saunders appeared somewhat amazed by this, but she then remembered to offer Romana a cup. Romana arched an eyebrow towards the doctor, took the cup, and politely sipped.
But now we need to find out why the world just ended,
the doctor said, taking the cup from Romana's hand and replacing it on the tray.
And why it's come back.
Romana sighed audibly.
Oh, that'll be nice for you, dear. Are you coming down for breakfast, then?
If you'll pardon us, where exactly are we?
My word, you must have had some night last night. This is Quarry Ridge Bed and Breakfast. Been in my family for years.
Quarry Ridge, did you say?
The TARDIS must be outside.
Excuse us.
The doctor apologized as they moved past Mrs. Saunders and ran out the door.
I'll keep the kettle on for you, dears.
Mrs. Saunders called after them helpfully. The doctor and Romana reached the street. The sun shone brightly. Everything seemed back to normal.
The bookstore, the bank.
But no TARDIS, no K9.
The TARDIS could be hidden by a distortion field,
the doctor said, pulling his sonic screwdriver from his coat. He attempted to activate it, but nothing happened.
Time for your 500-year battery change?
Romana asked sardonically.
No, I changed it 490 years ago,
the doctor replied, missing the jest.
It just doesn't work.
Romana tried her sonic screwdriver, on loan for the day from the doctor's collection, but with the same results.
How strange. What now?
Breakfast.
Seriously?
Can you think on an empty stomach?
The doctor replied, holding the door of the B&B open for her. Just then, an old man holding a fishing pole and a newspaper came out of the B&B and bumped into Romana. The newspaper and pole fell to the pavement.
"Oh, excuse me,"
the man said to Romana with an American accent.
My fault entirely.
Here, let me help you,
the doctor said as he picked up the items and handed them back to the man.
"Keep the paper. I read the forecast. It will be a great day for fishing. I'm Elmer, by the way, Elmer Boland. Pleased to meet you. Care to join me at Stirling Lake? The bass are biting."
Perhaps another time.
"All right. Be seeing ya."
He seems like a nice man, who doesn't remember the world ending any more than Mrs. Saunders did.
Have you considered the possibility that we may have flitted backwards in time?
So, we have the end of the world to look forward to after breakfast. Again.
Let's see what this paper has to say.
The doctor held it up so they could both read it.
The Daily Gazette, June 28th, but no year, no city.
The doctor began flipping through the paper at incredible speed. Then he folded it up again and threw it in a nearby rubbish bin.
What did you notice?
The article about the bird rescue facility on page 11 was insightful.
It was, although biased against cockatoos. What I learnt is that we are not on Earth.
And how did you deduce that?
Because it was all good news. That never happens on Earth.
Now that you mention it, the only article that wasn't entirely happy was the editorial.
By Dr. Emilio Vasquez, who has discovered a series of solar anomalies.
We should have a chat with him.
I'll take care of that while you stay here.
Now why would I do that?
To have a look around, to see if anyone remembers what we remember, and to look for the TARDIS. It may be hidden nearby.
That still doesn't sound as interesting as discussing astrophysics.
Romana, I don't know where we are, what's happening to us, or where the TARDIS is. Usually, when I arrive on a planet, I know the answer to at least one of those questions.
One of them?
There must be a reason why we ended up in this bed and breakfast. Find out whatever you can, and let me know what you discover.
All right. But if we come across a cosmologist, I'll talk while you search. Deal?
Deal.
The doctor replied, and they solemnly shook hands. Romana entered the B&B, while the doctor began walking down the road. He saw several vehicles passing, so he stuck out his thumb.
Can I get a lift? Eh? Anyone care to help a stranded Time Lord?
Excuse me, sir.
An officious voice said behind him. The doctor turned to see a British police bobby with a uniform from the 1970s standing behind him.
Would you mind putting your thumb away, please?
Is hitchhiking illegal here, officer?
Officer Hill, and it is, I'm afraid.
I stand admonished.
No need to worry, sir. Fortunately, the trolley will be here in a few minutes, and it's free to ride today, sir.
Serendipitous.
Indeed, sir. It's a free ride every day,
Hill said as he turned and walked away. The doctor's jaw hung open a little, but then he collected himself. Romana had decided to start with the attic and work her way down. There were plenty of trunks and boxes, but almost 3 millimeters of dust and plaster had settled on top of them. Romana changed her mind and decided to leave the attic until last. As she made her way down the ladder, a voice startled her.
Can I help you, dear?
I'm sorry. I was just...
She panicked and fished around for a white lie but came up empty.
I couldn't resist a look at your attic,
she said finally and flatly.
Oh, my dear, my home is your home. Please feel free to look around to your heart's content. If there's anything in particular you'd like to see.
No, nothing in particular.
Well, if you ever find out, let me know. And there's a door right over there, which you can try. I'll be serving tea when you're finished.
And with a smile, Mrs. Saunders walked down the stairs.
She's charming, sincere, and far too polite, even for an exotic alien life form,
Romana muttered to herself. She knocked on the door that Mrs. Saunders had indicated, which sprang open. There stood Elmer Bolam.
Elmer!
Hello there. Care to join me at Stirling Lake? I was about to go fishing. Great day for it.
But didn't you just run into us outside, on your way to Stirling Lake?
Elmer chuckled as if Romana had told an amusing joke.
Be seeing ya,
he said as he made his way toward the front door.
But Elmer, where's your fishing rod?
Romana called after him. The doctor had taken the trolley to the observatory. Just as Officer Hill had said, there was no fee for the service, and the other passengers chatted amongst themselves as if they did not care if they arrived at their destination. Also, he had not seen anyone else get on or off. The doctor entered the main entrance and looked around.
The decor, the furnishings, the equipment. This observatory is identical to the Australian Astronomical Observatory, except for this awful paint. What designer in their right mind would choose Battleship Grey?
Can I help you, sir?
A voice asked. The doctor turned to see a middle-aged man wearing thick glasses.
I'm the doctor, and you are?
Dr. Richardson.
Tell me, Dr. Richardson, where's the display on nucleosynthesis?
Down the hallway, first door on the left.
And the demonstration on cosmic ray spallation?
First door on the right. Are you an astrophysicist?
Among other things.
Oh, forgive me for not recognizing you earlier. It's you.
Of course it is. Who else would I be?
So nice to meet you, Director. I thought you weren't arriving until tomorrow.
Director?
I'm the Assistant Director. I've been looking forward to meeting you for some time, sir, but I know how busy your schedule has been.
Of course, of course.
Let me show you our networked array of computers linked by an open-source project led by Dr. Matthews. She's one of the best programmers we've ever...
The doctor had had enough of this. Being mistaken for someone else? Normal for a time traveller, but to become a desk-bound administrator? That was asking too much.
Pardon me, Dr. Richardson, but I'm not the director. I'm the doctor.
Doctor?
Quite. I'm looking for a colleague, Dr. Emilio Vasquez.
I'm afraid he resigned today.
Did he indeed? Well, well, well. Did he leave a forwarding address?
Yes, I'll get it for you.
And Dr. Richardson?
Yes?
Your incoming director, ex-naval officer by any chance?
A retired Commodore, in fact.
Good. He ought to feel right at home then.
Romana found herself trapped on the second floor of the B&B by an encyclopedia salesman.
The 11th edition Britannica is still considered the finest encyclopedia printed in the English language.
Yes, thank you.
Romana said, attempting to extricate herself.
Just call me Fred.
He replied with an overly polite smile. Romana's brain glitched for a second at the mention of the name.
I'm sure it's a bargain, Fred.
She continued, recovering her composure.
But if you'll excuse me.
And for a low monthly payment spread over only 36 months...
Do you have a business card?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good. Give it to Elmer. He's at Sterling Lake.
Forgive me, Elmer, she thought to herself. Then she quickly stepped past him and hurried down the stairs. Fred did not follow her. She could not help but wonder if even the creatures of the bulk could survive the onslaught of an American door-to-door salesman. She saw several people congregating on the ground floor, but did not recognize any of them. Mrs. Saunders was serving tea. But then she heard something outside, marching boots. From the bottom of the stairs she could see various life forms outside wearing military uniforms.
A platoon fan out. B squad over the doorway. C squad, you're with me.
Before Romana could hide, the front door was kicked in and C squad entered with weapons drawn.
Attention! I am Captain Tobin. You are surrounded by a superior force and you will obey each of my commands or you will be killed.
Everyone froze. The captain appeared human, but then so did Romana. About a third of them were not human, it seemed, from their motley collection of non-earthly characteristics. The soldiers' uniforms were mostly grey camo, but they had been patched so often with a variety of old material that it was hard to identify them. They also seemed to be collected from a variety of disparate sources. The soldiers wore no badges or insignia beyond their rank. They carried energy weapons from multiple civilizations. No three appeared to be the same make or model. A few carried packs on their backs. One soldier stood out because his pack looked new, while the rest were threadbare. Their boots were just as worn as everything else they carried, and they all looked hungry.
This is your only warning. Is that understood?
In Romana's eyes, Tobin appeared to be not only a soldier, but a survivor. There was something ruthless in his eyes that suggested he had no time for philosophy, ethics, or remorse. He also looked worn, in body and soul.
We have detected a data port in this area. You will now provide me with its exact location.
Romana, Mrs. Saunders, and the other guests looked at each other, but clearly no one knew what Tobin was referring to.
I see. Sergeant Gabber, select one of these citizens and bring them forward.
Sir?
Gabber responded, who moved quickly through the crowd until she zeroed in on Mrs. Saunders. She grabbed her arm and dragged her towards Captain Tobin. Mrs. Saunders stared at Tobin wide-eyed.
I asked a question. The location of the nearest data port, please.
Oh, I don't... Oh my, would you all like a cup of tea?
Weapons at the ready.
Please, Captain, I don't...
Wait!
Romana cried, even though she knew it would do little more than get her killed too. But there was a commotion outside, and no one seemed to have heard her. The soldiers were dragging an English bobby with a uniform from the 1970s inside.
What's all this, then? Take your hands off me. I'm a police officer and demand to be treated as such.
Civilian trying to break in, sir. Officer Hill!
Officer Hill. I am Captain Tobin of the Horde. Where is the nearest data port?
But Hill was having none of it.
I arrest you for carrying and displaying military-grade weaponry in public, assaulting an officer of the law, breaking and entering, disturbing the peace. I reject your authority and demand that you answer my question, officer, or you will be zeroed out. You are under arrest! Sergeant,
Sir!
Gabba aimed and fired at Officer Hill, who disintegrated into a yellow haze. Romana tried to take a step forward, but a soldier moved in towards her with a rifle aimed at her head. Mrs. Saunders fell to her knees, crying,
Oh, no! No!
Tobin turned back to Mrs. Saunders.
Tell me where that data port is now.
I don't know. Perhaps the observatory has one. I only run a bed and breakfast.
We're moving out. Gabba, take B platoon and search the alleyways and businesses nearby. A platoon, with me.
And just as quickly as they came, they left. Romana rushed over to Mrs. Saunders and helped her to her feet.
Are you all right? I'm so sorry. There was nothing I could do.
But as soon as Mrs. Saunders was on her feet, she stopped crying.
Oh, that's all right, dear. I'll make everyone some tea.
With that, she returned to the kitchen. Romana stood, gobsmacked. She turned to the others, who were already back to what they'd been doing when the soldiers arrived.
But that police officer...
Romana finally blurted out. But no one was listening. She turned towards the dark spot on the floor, which indicated where Officer Hill had been standing.
What is going on?
Romana cried. Dr. Emilio Vasquez was on his knees in his flower garden when he heard a man speaking on the other side of the fence.
Quite the azaleas.
Oh, thank you.
They always remind me of Louis Armstrong.
I never thought that.
And Madonna lilies. I haven't seen one of those in over 40 years.
I take it you're a gardener. Can I help you with something?
Yes, I'm looking for 210 Somerset Lane.
You found it.
Splendid. Dr. Emilio Vasquez, I presume.
I'm sorry, have we met?
Instead of answering, the doctor scanned the garden once again.
No sunflowers, then?
I beg your pardon?
No sunflowers in your garden. An interesting flower. It can tell you so much about the sun.
What? Sun? Why? What do you mean about...
Oh, nothing. Nothing at all. Apart from what happened in the not-too-distant past.
Who are you? What do you want?
I am the doctor, and I want to discuss your editorial, even though it was published a day late.
Did you...
Yes. I've lived through it too.
I thought that we were the only... You'd better come. Please, come inside.
He waved the doctor towards the fence gate and into the house. The house was clean and uncluttered. Almost the first thing the doctor saw was a boy typing at a computer. He turned towards his father and the doctor and said,
777.
My son, Juan. You'll have to forgive him. He's autistic.
Nothing to forgive.
The doctor replied, extending his hand.
Hello, Juan. I'm the doctor.
777.
Juan repeated, ignoring the doctor's gesture.
Sorry, he's hungry. 777 means that he wants chocolate.
How interesting.
The doctor replied. He put his hand down and turned to Juan.
Did you know that the number 7 represents perfection in many cultures?
Juan turned away from the doctor and back to his computer, but the doctor continued.
At least that's true in certain human cultures, not so much in alien ones. I wonder what kind of world this is, then.
Juan ignored him. Emilio returned and gave a small piece of chocolate to his son, who quickly popped it into his mouth.
I'm sorry, what were you saying, Doctor?
Emilio, where are we? What planet, I mean?
Well, what kind of question is that?
An honest one. There aren't many worlds that can be destroyed by a solar implosion and spring back to life again, to say nothing of the resilience of the sun.
Honestly, I think it was all mass hallucination.
000.
Juan replied, looking up at his father with concern.
What does that mean?
Nothing. Juan, go and play with your other toys for a minute and let us talk, please.
Reluctantly, Juan got off his chair and went into another room.
I made a mistake asking you to come inside.
Mass hallucinations are most likely to occur among the young, and I can assure you, I am not young. And they typically manifest themselves in bizarre illnesses, not the belief that the sun has imploded after an astrophysicist warns the world of
Stop it! Stop it! I don't know what's happening, but we can't be dead one day and alive the next. Things like that can't happen that often.
Often? You mean this has happened before?
No, of course not. I misspoke.
Who are you trying to convince? Me or yourself?
Emilio tried to speak, but just hung his head.
Emilio, how often does this occur?
What kind of lunatic are you? What planet is this? Get out! Get out now!
Suddenly, Juan was in the room with them, pulling at Emilio's leg.
0, 0, 0. 0, 0, 0.
Emilio knelt down to comfort his son, but instead of a hug, he touched him quickly and let go.
I'm sorry, Juan. I'm sorry.
Does 000 mean stop, then?
Yes. Or that something's ending. Occasionally when something's arriving. Termination of some occurrence, the beginning of another. His mode of communication isn't precise yet. He's better with numbers than words.
Let's sit down for a moment,
the doctor said, helping Emilio to a comfy chair. He turned and held out his hand towards Juan.
Juan?
No. He doesn't like to be touched. It's part of his condition. Juan, go back to your computer and let us talk.
Juan obeyed.
Emilio, believe me, I want to help. Please tell me what's happened here.
I've dreamt that the world has come to an end in vivid detail so many times. At least, I think they were dreams. But so real. But after I die, I wake up the next day, or what seems like the next day, and everything is back to the way it was. This seems to happen every 9 to 13 months. I can't be sure. You don't know how much time has passed when you wake up afterward. The date on the calendar changes, and no one else seems to notice. I don't know if Juan notices. I hope not. The world ended due to earthquakes, comet strikes, flooding, and yesterday, at about this time, it was the sun. But this last disaster happened so quickly. Usually we spend weeks or months dealing with the emergency, trying to stay alive, but this time we all died instantly.
4, 3, 7.
Juan said, looking at his monitor. The doctor and Emilio looked at him, but Juan did not react.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Back at the observatory, Dr. Richardson was walking towards the coffee machine, reading a file, when the door to the complex burst open and several armed soldiers marched in. Richardson froze as one particularly grizzled soldier made straight for him.
Attention! I am Captain Tobin. This observatory is surrounded by a superior force, and you will obey each of my commands, or we will open fire. Is that understood?
Several of Tobin's soldiers had already raised their weapons towards Richardson.
Can I help you, sir? We have detected a data port in this vicinity. You will now provide me with its exact location. A data port? I don't understand. Private, shoot him. Wait, we don't. We have a networked array of computers linked by an open source project led by Dr. Matthew. Perhaps that would help you. Corporal Sharp, take your platoon.
Yes, sir.
What is your name? Dr. Richardson, Assistant Director. Where is the director?
Corporal Sharp returned.
Captain, we're downloading approximately 16 terabytes of information, but the system states that one hard drive is missing.
Dr. Richardson, you will give me the location of this hard drive. I don't know. All of our employees are here today except... Dr. Richardson, what is the name and location of the employee who took the hard drive?
Romana had worked her way towards the basement at the bed and breakfast. No one had seemed concerned by the death of the police officer or had even acknowledged that it had happened. In disgust, she had returned to her work. At first, she worried that the basement would be the usual musty dirt and concrete pit filled with insect life and discarded property. However, it was unusually clean, far less cluttered or grimy than some rooms in the TARDIS, in fact. Romana took a step and stumbled. Something heavy had caught her foot, which looked exactly like a trapdoor from a late medieval castle. A huge iron ring had been bolted onto strong oak planks with cast iron hinges facing Romana. The wood and iron seemed about 200 years old, but with no sign of structural decay.
What's a trapdoor doing in a basement?
Romana mused to herself. She took out her loner sonic screwdriver before remembering they no longer worked. She put it away and sighed. She knew she could never tell the doctor that she had found an out-of-place trapdoor and failed to open it.
I'd never hear the end of it,
she muttered quietly. Romana bent down and pulled at the ring. After a moment, the door began to swing upwards. Instantly, she could feel the air being sucked out of the room and into whatever lay beneath. She quickly dropped the ring, the door slammed shut, and the rush of air halted. Romana had not been able to see into whatever it was, but she suspected that beneath her feet was nothing but the void.
How existential,
she muttered. She quickly returned up the stairs and saw Mrs. Saunders carrying a tray of empty teacups into the kitchen.
Mrs. Saunders,
Romana began, but was halted when she heard the front door burst open again. But instead of soldiers, they heard a hum. It grew louder and more grating. Something about the sound made Romana want to run. Instead of running, she stepped out of the kitchen to see a blue man about 7 feet tall hovering 6 inches above the ground. She did not recognize the species. The people inside the B&B did not seem to notice him, even Mrs. Saunders, who had just stepped out of the kitchen.
Mrs. Saunders,
the man began. Mrs. Saunders suddenly noticed him. Romana could detect no warmth in the greeting, only accuracy.
Oh no! Help! Police!
Who are you?
The blue man ignored Romana entirely. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Saunders and said,
calm down.
Within 2 seconds, Mrs. Saunders had indeed calmed down. She smiled at the blue man and said,
Tea, dear?
What are you doing?
Who has been here recently?
Apart from the normal customers, 5 people. One was Officer Hill, but he's dead now.
Noted,
the blue man said, nodding as if taking this down. Romana, torn between interrupting and staying quiet, began edging her way back to the kitchen.
Captain Tobin and Sergeant Gabba of the Horde, plus several others whose names I didn't catch. And of course, there's the Doctor and Romana,
she concluded, pointing toward Romana. Romana froze. The blue man turned to Romana as if he had just noticed her for the first time.
Come here, Romana.
No, I don't think so,
Romana replied, making a break for the kitchen. But the door suddenly shut in her face.
If you have the ability to disobey me, then you are truly new to this place,
the blue man replied, hovering toward Romana. The humming noise increased as Romana tried to pull the door open, but it would not move. The front door of the B&B was suddenly pushed open and several people marched in. Romana and the blue man turned towards the sound. Some of the Horde had returned.
My troops require meals, which you will...
Sergeant Gabba began, then stalled as she saw the blue man. She quickly recovered and barked,
Weapons at the ready! Gabba is the lady giving orders,
Mrs. Saunders said to the blue man helpfully. The blue man did not reply to her, but turned away from Romana and toward Gabba.
You will all place your weapons at your feet and surrender.
Fire!
Romana threw herself to the floor as multiple energy weapons were discharged. After a few seconds, she glanced up and saw the blue man, still hovering and unaffected by the weaponry. He was looking at Gabba and her troops as if they were disobedient animals.
Put down your weapons,
he kept repeating. When the soldiers did not comply, he sighed and began pointing his finger at them. As he did so, Romana watched in horror as their weapons exploded.
Sir, weapons backfiring. He must be...
And then the soldier's gun exploded.
Pull back! Pull back!
She waved her troops back out the door. The blue man, still hovering, followed them. Romana stood and turned to Mrs. Saunders. She was calmly serving tea to her guests, none of whom seemed to have noticed the firefight nearby.
Perhaps you ought to evacuate.
Oh, don't be silly, dear. Now let me make a fresh pot.
Oh, shut up!
Romana snapped as she made her way to the front door. The soldiers and the blue man were already fighting in the street. Romana followed them cautiously as the soldiers retreated, continuing to fire at the man, but to no effect. Every so often a soldier was killed as his weapon detonated. Romana continued to follow until a stray energy bolt struck near her head. She ducked into an alley and was about to look again when she felt a gun touching the back of her head.
Who are you?
Romana, I'm not with the blue man.
Who was he? Do you know?
No, I was hoping you could tell me.
Whose side are you on? Are you a spy?
Please calm down. You're trembling and your finger is on the trigger.
Gabba pulled her gun back, but did not reholster it. Romana turned slowly around, but her eyes widened as she saw the blue man hovering behind Gabba. Seeing Romana's expression, Gabba spun around and raised her weapon.
Now that I have you both here, I have some questions for you.
Stay back!
Don't shoot! Your gun will explode!
Gabba kept her weapon up but did not fire.
And I warn you, I want the truth. Now, why did you cause the sun to implode?
654! 654!
Juan cried. They were still inside the house. Juan was seated at the computer, but now facing the doctor and Emilio.
What does that mean? I've never heard him like this before.
321!
I'm sorry, we don't know what you mean. But it sounds like a
He stood sharply and began looking out the windows.
countdown. What?
000!
The front door was smashed open. The doctor ducked, and Emilio moved towards Juan to cover his son with his body. 3 beings walked in with weapons raised. The doctor's ears were ringing as he heard shouts ordering them not to move. The doctor slowly raised his hands.
Attention! I am Captain Tobin. You are surrounded by a superior force and you will obey each of my commands or we will open fire. Is that understood?
Tell me, did your training include the use of a doorbell?
Tobin turned towards the doctor. Good, thought the doctor. Concentrate on me, not Emilio and Juan.
You have a stolen hard drive from the observatory. You will hand it over to my custody.
By whose authority, might I ask?
By the authority of the weapons aimed at your vital organs.
The doctor thought this might have been an attempt at dark humour, but Tobin was not smiling at all, and neither were his troops. He decided to play for time.
Who told you that you could find the hard drive here? What do you need it for?
Tobin sighed and shook his head.
Everyone we meet in this world questions orders.
He said to his troops in a sad voice. They responded with dark chuckles.
Captain Tobin, I assure you, you will have my full cooperation if you will just put down your weapons and...
Private, zero him out.
Wait!
000!
The soldier fired. The doctor heard, far away, the sound of a man screaming. Before everything went dark, he realized it was him.
Masters? Mistresses? The Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, Masters, Mistresses.